welcome to Savadestan Ask, the podcast where we answer your burning questions about pop culture. I'm your host Zeinab, and today we have our special guest with us. Please welcome Zahra.
Thank you, Zeinab. It's great to be here.
Today, we're going to be talking about the evolution of pop culture. Zahra, can you start us off by defining what pop culture is?
Of course. Pop culture refers to the popular trends, beliefs, and practices that dominate mainstream society. This can include everything from fashion, music, and movies to social media and the internet.
That's a great definition. Now let's talk about the story of pop culture. How has it evolved over time?
Pop culture has always been shaped by the current events and social climate of the time. In the 1950s and 60s, for example, pop culture was heavily influenced by the post-World War II economic boom and the rise of consumerism. This gave way to the birth of rock and roll, which was a major cultural force at the time.
Interesting. What about 1970s and 80s?
In the 70s and 80s, pop culture was heavily influenced by the counterculture movements of the 60s, as well as the rise of disco and punk music. This was also the time when blockbuster movies like Star Wars and Jaws became popular, which helped to define the era.
And what about 90s?
The 90s was a decade of great change both politically and culturally. This was the time when grunge music became popular, as well as hip-hop and rap. The rise of the internet also began to shape pop culture as people began to spend more time online.
That's a great overview of history of pop culture. Now let's talk about some of the biggest trends in the movies and pop culture today. What are some of the things that are currently shaping the industry?
Well, I think one of the biggest trends in pop culture today is the rise of streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime. These platforms have completely changed the way we consume media and have given rise to a new era of television and film.
Definitely true. And what about social media? How has it impacted pop culture?
Social media has had a huge impact on pop culture as it has given rise to a new generation of influencers and celebrities. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok have made it easier than ever for people to build a following and gain fame, and have completely changed the way we think about celebrity culture.
Great point. And what about current political climate? How does it impact pop culture?
I think the current political climate has had a major impact on pop culture, with issues like race, gender coming to the forefront of the national conversation. We are seeing more diversity and representation in movies, TV shows, and music than ever before.
Definitely true. And finally, let's talk about the future of pop culture. What do you think the industry will look like in the coming years?
That's a great question. I think we'll continue to see a rise in streaming services and online media, as well as more diversity and representation in pop culture. I also think we'll see a greater emphasis on interactive and immersive experiences as technology continues to advance.
That's definitely an exciting prospect. And what about the impact of global events like COVID-19 pandemic?
The pandemic has had a major impact on the entertainment industry, with movie theaters and live events shutting down for long periods of time. But it's also given rise to new forms of entertainment, like virtual concerts and online performances. It will be interesting to see how the industry adapts and evolves in response to these changes.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Zahra, for joining us and sharing your insights on the evolution of pop culture.
Thank you for having me, Zeinab. It was a pleasure.
Before we wrap up this episode, we have a few listener questions that we'd like to address. Our first question comes from Sarah in New York. She asks, what do you think is the most influential decade in pop culture history?
That's a great question, Sarah. I think each decade has its own unique influence on pop culture, but if I had to pick one, I would say the 1960s. This was the time of great social and political change, and pop culture played a major role in shaping that change. The rise of rock and roll and the counterculture movement had a huge impact on the youth of the time, and the legacy of the 60s can still be seen in pop culture today.
Our next question comes from John in London. He asks, do you think traditional forms of entertainment like movie theaters and live performances will ever make a comeback post-pandemic?
That's a great question, John. I think it's definitely possible that the traditional forms of entertainment will make a comeback post-pandemic. While streaming services and online media have become increasingly popular, there is still something special about seeing a movie or attending a live performance in person. I think people will be eager to get back to these experiences once it's safe to do so.
Our final question comes from Maria in Los Angeles. She asks, what advice do you have for someone who wants to work in the pop culture industry?
That's a great question, Maria. My advice would be to start by building a strong foundation of knowledge and experience in the industry. This could mean getting a degree in a relevant field. It's also important to network and build relationships with people in the industry, as this can help you to get your foot in the door and find opportunities.
Great advice, Zahra. Thank you to all of our listeners for your questions. We hope we were able to provide some helpful insights. That's all for today's episode of Savadestan Ask. Join us next time for another exciting topic in the world.